I want to say thank you to Scott for your communion message. It was right on point. It's something that we all need to hear, that there's definitely troublesome times out there, but there's those little blessings that we got, that God is showing us every day. And, it's just amazing what He's doing for us. This morning I want to talk to you about something that doesn't get a lot of preaching time. But I think it's something that's vitally important to the future of the church. Not just of this congregation, but to God's overall church. But before we get there, I want to ask you simply, how many, just quick show of hands, how many of you, just by looking at this picture, know who this man is? Okay, so quite a few of us, a little more than I actually thought. Now, without telling you his name, even if you don't know him by sight, you know his work. If you were to reach into your pocket right now, how many of you got an iPod, an iPhone, or sitting in your lap an iPad, or maybe on your wrist an iWatch? The man on this screen, his name is Steve Jobs, and he was the brainchild of the concept of all of these items. He's done amazing work in the tech field before his passing a few years ago. Many of you probably heard of him because of his visionary thoughts on technology. But I wonder if we've seen in all the books, all the movies, all the magazines, something that goes far deeper than his idea on technology. As a child, Steve Jobs was a regular attendee at his local church. And he had, as most visionaries do, a very inquisitive mind. And one day he brought in this magazine cover to his pastor. He wanted to ask him about it. But he didn't go straight up to him and ask him about that. He started somewhere else. He said, if I lift a finger on my hand, does God know which finger I'm going to lift before I do it? Very, very astute question for a 13-year-old. And the answer was very simple. Yes, I think that he would know about that. And so then a young Steve Jobs took this magazine cover out of his pocket. And on the cover it showed, I don't remember the name of the magazine or the year, but it showed two young African children that had been starving. And I think this is vitally important to understand where I'm going this morning. He asked, so does God know about this? There was doubt in his voice. There was extreme concern that God would know about this. And the pastor, not sensing the doubt and the fear that this question was raising, he unfortunately didn't give a very great answer. What he said was simply this: I know you don't understand, Steve, but yes, he knows about that too. That was the end of the conversation. There was no explanation, no apologetic defense, no let's turn to this scripture, no discussion on how we have screwed up the perfect world God created. Just a simple, yes, God knows about that. He didn't have his doubts reconciled. And so out of the church Steve Jobs walked that day, supposedly never to walk back in again. It's an absolute tragedy for me to hear this story, knowing that a little bit more effort could have been done to take this visionary who did so many great things. But what could he have done as a Christian man doing those things? It seems to me that doubt is almost universally identified as a fearful trait in the church today. Something that, something to be reviled. But you come up with names like Doubting Thomas, and it tells what he did one time. We forget everything else Thomas did. If we're going to speak about doubt this morning, we have to first define what this word actually means. In the English, it's pretty simple. It's simply defined as being uncertain of something or not believing in something. But it's not so cut and dry in the New Testament. The New Testament has at least, now this is only what I was able to dig up, but at least 5 different words that can be translated as doubt. You can find one in James chapter 1 and in Jude. It's diakrino, and it's used to describe someone who is unsettled in their faith, or someone who's wavering between two opinions. In Jude, it's specifically referred to as wavering between two opinions because there's been a lot of false teaching going on. And he specifically tells the Christians, look, I know that there's people out there that are wavering between two faiths, or two opinions. Have mercy on them. People are trying to tear their faith down. Show them mercy. The second one we can find in a couple of different places in Matthew. It's diastazo, and it's used by Jesus to describe his disciples' lack of trust in him. Now, we all know the famous line, "Why did you doubt, you of little faith?" You stepped out here on this water, Peter. You were walking on the water. Why did you doubt, you of little faith? And he does this a couple times. I think it kind of became a pet name for his disciples. You little faith ones is literally what it's translated as. It's not accusing them. He's calling them almost lovingly, you little faith ones. I want to teach you a more perfect way. And so we've got that one. There's a third one that we find in John chapter 10, verse 25. And it's the word, actually two words, sukin ero, which is used to describe the unbelieving Jews that Jesus is speaking to, but also the Jews that he's speaking about throughout history. And that's a much more strong usage of this, whereas some of these are just saying various levels of questioning and uncertainty. This one is saying, you have gone on to complete unbelief. There's a fourth one that Paul uses in 2 Corinthians, and it's the word aporeo, and he uses it to describe his own feelings as being perplexed. And he specifically tells his readers with this one that while he is perplexed, sorry, that's a hard word to get out sometimes, he specifically tells them that it has not led him to despair. And then finally, there's the fifth one. In Luke chapter 12, during Jesus' teaching on worry, the Greek word metaorizo is used to describe those who are anxiously worrying about things which God will provide. So there's a lot of different various usages of these words that we can translate as doubt. And I think a lot of them speak to different elements than we usually think about. They give us a glimpse into Scripture and what they mean, but there's vast differences between them. Those who refuse to believe are not put in the same category as those who are just trying to figure out truth. Those who fight against their worry are not in the same category as those who are trying to find a way in their faith. There is such a thing as a sincere and authentic doubt in which somebody wants their problems solved. In which case the person doubting wants to go forward in their faith. They want their relationship with God to flourish. They want to just fully trust. But they're having trouble doing it. Now I know that at some point in all of our lives, as Scott mentioned this morning, we're talking about each and every one of us. There are doubts that are arisen in each of our lives at various points for different reasons. But that's not necessarily the way that we usually teach about doubt. Doubt is not the same as unbelief. Doubt is not the end of your faith, but it can be the reason to search out a stronger and deeper faith. St. Augustine had this to say about doubt. Doubt is but another element of your faith. Charles Spurgeon said it this way: anybody who tells me that they have never had a doubt about God's plan or will for their lives, I begin to doubt whether that person's telling me the truth. Karl Barth said that when the theologian doubts, that he shouldn't despair, because doubt has its time and place. And the Bible tells me that it's not so uncommon as we try to make it out. Look at all these great heroes of the faith, and you'll find doubt within each of them. Start with Moses. He starts by questioning why God chose him. He couldn't speak eloquently. He couldn't go do this by himself. And then he chose to question, God, why did you choose these unfaithful people? What's up with that? Why do you want these people? And yet, after he has his questions answered, after he spends time searching the answers and searching out that time with God, he's a completely changed individual. He literally changes God's mind. He says, God, don't wipe them out, please. I know I complained earlier about them, and I probably will complain about them again, but don't wipe these people out. These are your promised children through Abraham's seed. Don't start over with me. They're already here. Use them. His doubt had changed to faith. What about Gideon? Gideon, he tends to express his own abilities as a doubt. He says, I'm just the most worthless person from the lowest clan, from the smallest tribe of Israel. What do you want with me? He's got some great doubts there. When he's called mighty warrior, don't worry, God's going to be with you in this. He's like, this God that I'm having trouble experiencing, this God that none of us have seen, although our parents and our grandparents, they tell us about God, these stories about what he did. Gideon's saying, none of us have seen this. He's expressing a sincere doubt, not an unbelief, but he wants questions answered. He wants to be able to trust and believe. He's desiring that. And after his period of doubting, what he does is he goes and wins a battle with probably the most ridiculous battle plan ever drawn up. What about Sarah? If we consider the wife of Abraham, the woman whose doubt led her to suggest her handservant to him. And we know what kind of tragedy that's brought about even to today. Her doubt was so great that when she just overheard that she would have a child in her old age, she laughed at God. Let that sink in. The God of the entire universe is saying, Sarah, you're going to have a child. And she laughed at him. There's serious doubt in her. But she eventually believes it. Not because it makes sense, but because God said it. And so, from her, we have the promised child. And then I think I've mentioned Thomas a little bit already. And when he was told about the Lord's resurrection, what was his response to that? It was so unlikely in his mind that he said, unless I can touch Jesus' flesh, put my finger in the holes in his hand and in his side, unless I can see him and touch him, I'm not willing to accept this yet. Now, you can look at that as just genuine unbelief. I tend to look at it as, what was he going to do with this concern of his? Because he could have just said, it's unlikely, I'm not buying this. But when the disciples came together next, there was Thomas, ready to see, ready to have his faith confirmed. We call him Doubting Thomas, but I tend to think of him a little bit more as a pessimist until he's been shown it's right. And then what does Thomas do? After that, he's amongst the disciples when they go teaching and preaching. Traditionally, he was thought of as going out to India and Pakistan and having great success there. That old doubter did a lot of good in the name of Christ. Well, what about Peter? Peter, well, he doubted that the Lord could really keep him safe sometimes. So when he was confronted with, hey, weren't you with Jesus? Like, no, not me. That was some other guy. Must have just looked like me. He did that 3 times because for whatever reason, his doubts were, can God really keep me safe? Can Jesus take care of me? And after overcoming this doubt, what does he do? His faith has grown, and now he's teaching, he's preaching. We have the entire book of Acts, or at least half of it, is talking about all the wonderful, miraculous things that he's doing. He becomes a great preacher, bold in the face of those who are telling him to stop preaching. Or in the passage that we read this morning about John the Baptist. John the Baptist, Jesus himself says, there is no greater man born among women. In case you're not aware, that's everybody. Everybody born among women. John the Baptist is the greatest. And yet, he spent his whole life preaching, the Christ is coming, the Messiah is here. He's the man that you should be listening to. And yet, when he's arrested, he's awaiting his death. And John the Baptist does what? He sends his disciples out to say, Jesus, are you really the one that we were supposed to be looking for? He has concern in his heart, not because he doesn't want to believe, but because he wants his faith confirmed. He wants his faith deepened. Now, I want you to think of yourself in his disciples' shoes at that point. Wait a minute, John, you want me to go talk to Jesus, not to let him know your situation, but because now you are having trouble believing what you preach? And yet he was willing to be looked at with such scrutiny in order to have his faith confirmed. And I know some of you are looking at this last one here, and you're seeing Jesus on this list, and you're wondering, why is he up there? God's Son doesn't belong on the list of doubters. But I want you to think through his human side with me for a moment. In the Garden of Gethsemane, in his prayer, his doubt wasn't of unbelief or of not wanting to go do it. It was a question of, God, is this really the only way? Is this the way that this plan has to go? That my death is it? I don't think we see doubt the way that the Bible and the writers of the Bible see doubt. What about when he's on the cross? Jesus cries out to God in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me? Again, not questioning the necessity of the plan, not questioning the existence of God, but questioning, why have you done this? Why have you allowed this? Who among us doesn't want to ask those questions at times? Who among us doesn't come with our own cover of some article that says, look at the devastation in this world? And who among us doesn't think, how does this fit with the greater whole? We're not any different. Honest believers need to seek the answers to their heartfelt questions. 1 Thessalonians 5:23 tells us that sanctification, the process of becoming holy, comes only from God. And Paul also writes in there to make sure to be thankful. Troy preached 2 wonderful lessons on being thankful. I wonder sometimes, have we been thankful for our doubts? Because those who have not doubted or questioned, I promise you, have not grown. It's not about avoiding the struggle. It's about finding the people who will help you through the struggle. It's about trusting in God to bear your burden. Instead of trying to make sure doubt never happens, I think it's time to rethink how we approach the topic. Lillian Kwan she did a study of college students, and she wrote this in regard to doubt. The more college students felt that they had an opportunity to express their doubts while they were in high school, the higher their levels of faith maturity and spiritual maturity. When I read that, it absolutely blew my mind. We would tend to think it's the other way around, that if we question things, if we doubt, we're more likely to fall into unbelief. But she found that the more we have a genuine opportunity to work out those serious debates in our mind and with other people, it provides us the opportunity to grow so much deeper in Christ. Citing similar studies, a man named David Kinman wrote, I believe that unexpressed doubt is one of the most powerful destroyers of faith. So what does this tell us? We've got people in the Bible that are doubters. We've got these people who are spiritually mature as they're growing up who are doubters. It tells me that the church has got to be a place where this conversation is taken up. It tells me that this has to be a safe place for us to go and have these conversations. That we don't come across as hostile. Gentleness is one of the fruits of the Spirit. And that's the way we ought to accept those who are in doubt, or having doubts, or have questions. If we meet with hostility, these questions, just because we're fearful of what that might bring up, then we're cementing that person, that individual, that soul's doubt into unbelief. This is also a conversation that has to happen in the home. And parents, I'm speaking directly to you now, and I know myself, I'm speaking to myself. Mothers and fathers Whether they know it or not, they are the primary force of spiritual development in their children.
Amen.
You see so little at the church building, and yet you spend how many hours with that child each and every day? You are the primary spiritual development for your kids. And parents, you need to be brave enough to have these deep discussions with your children. Do you know what's going on in their lives that's causing them to question and doubt and fear? If you ignore this, all you are doing is cementing their unbelief. And parents, you don't have to just engage them with it. You've got to open up enough to be vulnerable to your kids. To say, I don't know. That's what I'm still struggling with. That will do more for an open and honest conversation with your kids than you could ever imagine. Because you're saying, I'm still seeking God. I'm still growing. It doesn't matter that I've been a Christian for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. I'm still working this out. This isn't a battle that we can ignore because it's not a battle we can afford to lose. I may never have all the answers, simply because I'm not God. That's a good thing. You don't want me God. But the search becomes meaningless if the doubt becomes cemented into unbelief. The search is the absolute most critical part of this entire process. Because as we search, as we question, as doubts arise, it opens up ways for us to experience God in ways we've never thought possible. And sometimes what even happens is through that searching, through that trying to experience God, trying to get that question or doubt answered, what ends up happening is you see God at a whole new level. All of a sudden that question doesn't matter anymore. Because you found God over here when you were looking over there. Sometimes the questions and doubts are just going to fall away because of the deepening of your faith. But some are still going to linger, and that's okay. I want you to understand that. Doubt is acceptable if it's not your stopping place. Doubt is your starting place. For me personally, I look at my own studies. I spent, back in 2005, a solid semester class just looking at the Trinity. I don't know, Trey, if you ever had to do something like this, but it was amazing to, there's libraries written on this topic. And I learned a lot. But I'll tell you what, I walked out of that class thinking, I still don't understand this at all. It just is. Accept it, move on. I still try to find new things about it, but my faith was so deepened in the study, finding out elements of God's character, it didn't matter that I didn't understand some of those things anymore. God's not supposed to be fully understood because He's God, we're not. Doubt is not the problem. Our failure to seek out the answers required to overcome our doubt. That's the problem. I'm still going to love and I'm still going to follow God even though I don't fully understand Him. Because I know He's big enough to take my doubts, to take my questions, to take my concerns, and to turn those into amazing, wonderful faith opportunities. Our God is enormous and can do anything in order to guide us and take us by the hand through the struggles. So what about you? Have you had some doubts of late? Have you had some struggles that you just want to say, God, I don't get this? You know what? Take them to Him. Jesus did. Straight from the cross, Jesus said, why have you forsaken me? Jesus has said, I am the intercessor. I've given you the Spirit who's groaning on your behalf. I'm pretty sure that it's okay if we just go ahead and take their doubts to God. And to take our doubts and our questions to each other. Because that's how it's meant to be. We're not supposed to do this alone. Alone is the only way that this doesn't make sense. There's nobody among us who will not experience those trials, those troubles, those tribulations. And with those will come lots of questions of why. God, why am I here? God, why are you doing this or allowing this in my life? God, why is that happening to this person? God, why are those people so evil? Those questions are okay to ask. And it's time we fully accept that as a church of Jesus, that we can take all of that to Him. So what about you this morning? Have you been taking that to Christ? Have you been taking those doubts and fears to your brothers and sisters here at the body? If not, I want you to know that this morning, in just a moment, we're going to get up here and we're going to sing the song called Thomas's Song. I think it should be more accurately called the Disciples' Song, because it speaks to someone who starts in complete and utter uncertainty and ends with someone who is in complete and utter faith. It is a song written around each of our own heartaches, our own hurts, our own fears. It's just written in a way that Thomas expressed it. If you need somebody to talk to, if you need somebody to just sit down with and study, I promise you, there's how many people here? How many people could you go to and just say, could you just sit with me and listen? I guarantee you, there's not a soul here who would look you in the eye and say, I'm not willing to listen. Because we're brothers and sisters in Christ. We are all willing to help. We are all willing to see that your doubts don't become unbelief, but that your doubts point you directly to a true and genuine faith. This morning, if you're struggling with doubt, if there's anything that you need, I ask that you come to stand and sing.
Good thoughts, man.